Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Aaron.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Todd, I have to find out where you are.
I'm just hanging out down at Mar-a-Lago. We got discount rates down here, $59.99 a night. It's awesome.
Wow, that's a great deal.
Place is really cleared out. Former president just brought me a appetizer. It's beautiful.
Todd, is that your COVID hair or is that a palm tree?
No, that's a palm tree. This is real hair, by the way. So
it looks good.
Very impressive.
Yeah, you don't have to lie.
Well, welcome to Pints and Politics, our first edition of 2021. I'm Erin Jordan. I'm the Gazette's investigative reporter and your moderator for tonight. So just a little update on 2021. Pints and Politics, we're expecting to continue virtually for at least the first few events of the year. So we're hoping maybe May might allow an in-person distance event, but we'll stay tuned for that. So joining our regular but still very special panel tonight is Kathy Obradovich, the editor-in-chief of the Iowa Capital Dispatch, which is a news nonprofit based in Des Moines. So Kathy and I are former co-workers at the Des Moines Register, where she worked as political columnist and opinion editor. But she's covered Iowa government and politics more than 30 years in Des Moines, Davenport, Waterloo, Sioux City, Mason City, and Muscatine. So Kathy, you have really covered Iowa from border to border. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here and feel really ancient now after that introduction. Appreciate it.
Well, I think, if we trotted out how many places Todd and James have worked too, I mean,
Kathy and I used to work elbow to elbow at the state capitol, sitting there on press bench, trying to type and listen to that very educational debates going on the floor.
Yeah, and they're actually both in the House, both the House and Senate are still going on right now.
Yeah.
So we wish we were there.
Right. So just to introduce our regular panelists, we have James Lynch, Gazette political editor, Todd Dorman, Gazette Insights and Opinion Editor, and Adam Sullivan, Gazette columnist. For people watching and listening in tonight, you can join the conversation by submitting a question. To do this, you need to click on the comment button or chat bubble icon and enter your name first. And I'll work as many questions as I can into our hour-long show, which starts with national politics. In fact, I think I see a question coming in already, so we'll start integrating those as well. But so last week, Joe Biden was sworn in as president and immediately signed a host of executive orders on topics ranging from climate change to drug prices. I wanted to ask the panelists, what do you think are the most important or noteworthy of these executive orders? Or which one would you choose to highlight?
Do you want us to just jump in? Or
Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
These guys are being pokey.
Okay, well, I would just start with the environmental proposals. Joe Biden signed a whole host of those, ranging from renewable fuels issues, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. I think Iowa, positioned as it is as a green energy state, with its high level of electric power generated from renewable resources, and the ethanol is positioned to benefit from some of those environmental regulations. But there's also a downside as a farm state. Some of those environmental regulations may constrict agriculture. So, I mean, I think that there's some pros and cons to those for various different industries in Iowa. But, definitely we're sort of in the center of things in terms of impact for that.
I think that's a really interesting point in his executive order. Like Kathy said, probably will impact Iowa, some good, some bad. Today General Motors announced that by, I think it's 2035, they're going to quit making gas-powered cars. I'm not sure what impact that's going to have on the ethanol industry, but it seems like demand will be diminished. There may be a lot more demand for electricity then, and we'll put windmills on every acre.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's been a lot of conversation about, Biden's order to pause in oil and gas drilling on federal land, halt in construction of the Keystone pipeline, and transition to electric vehicles for the federal government. I didn't see a lot of mention about renewables. And I know Joni Ernst had an email she sent out, saying like, don't forget about renewables. What are you guys hearing about that?
Well, renewables written broad, we're talking about wind energy, for example, the offshore wind, kind of in place of renewing oil and gas leases on public land. I think you've seen a lot of that so far, but you're right. They haven't talked a lot about biofuels in particular, and that is a touchy subject. In terms of biofuels perhaps being the better alternative to gas and to gas, but it's also, as James said, going to give way to electric probably at some point. How long that will be, it's hard to say. But I think on his way out the door, President Trump gave another thump to the biofuels industry by approving a couple more refinery waivers. They never really said how much ethanol will have to be blended in 2020. I think it's 2022, and so they are going to be waiting for the Biden's EPA to clarify what some of the rules are going to be going forward the next couple of years.
Well, and we're probably also going to see another fight over the the scope of the Clean Water Act. The Obama administration had the Waters of the U.S. rules that agriculture sort of carpet bombed with a lot of arguments against, including some that weren't exactly factual. But then the Trump administration came out with its own rules, which left a lot of wetlands across the country open to draining and development, which troubled a lot of environmental folks. But now the Biden administration has put the Trump rules on hold. And so whatever the new rules, basically these are rules that seek to sort of set out the scope of the Clean Water Act and what the regulations apply to. We know they apply to navigable rivers, but then you get into a fight when it comes to smaller tributaries, streams, wetlands. Joni Ernst famously claimed that the Obama rules would regulate water in a tractor tire tread, which was a nice line, but not factual. So this is going to come up again. You're going to see big agricultural interests like the Farm Bureau and others are going to line up against basically whatever the Biden administration puts out there, and we'll probably see lawsuits, and as we've already seen with the Obama and Trump rules. So that'll be interesting to watch. It'll probably be 4 years of jockeying and maybe no change in the rules.
And I think that once the Senate trial of Donald Trump begins, we'll probably forget about executive orders for the foreseeable future. It's good, active news from the new president while it lasts.
Well, James, it's like you foresaw what my next question was going to be. So former President Donald Trump has been impeached by the U.S. House, and the U.S. Senate is planning an impeachment trial based on Trump's involvement in the potentially spurring the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. It sounds like people are saying there may not be enough votes in the Senate, and that was one of the questions from our audience members. What are the odds of an impeachment vote in the Senate? And if there's not, if the votes aren't there, there's been some talk about a censure instead. I guess I don't really. Is a censure just like a verbal saying you shouldn't have done that, or does it hinder at all President Trump's involvement in national politics in the future?
I don't think it would limit his involvement. Yeah, I think it is sort of a stern warning. And I think there are both Democrats and Republicans who are pushing this idea of a censure. I think part of it is that they are making an assumption that a conviction won't happen. There aren't enough votes for conviction. So a censure might get more Republican votes and would be certainly a blot on the Trump presidency if he's censured by the Senate. I think for some Republicans in the Senate, they're making this argument that it's unconstitutional to impeach a former president, and that gives them some cover so they can vote no on conviction because they're doing the constitutional thing.
There was a vote, I believe, this week to say, basically to dismiss the impeachment, to say that you can't impeach a former president. And I think there were only 5 or 6 Senate Republicans who voted to proceed with the impeachment. So that gives you an idea of where they would be at on conviction. So Iowa's 2 senators voted to dismiss, and even Mitch McConnell, who, a week ago had sounded pretty strongly when he was criticizing the president, he voted to dismiss as well. And so I think that's pretty disappointing. I think there was some thought right after the January 6th riot that there might be, a bigger number of Senate Republicans that would vote for conviction. So I was disappointed by that, but yeah, I think that vote bears out that conviction is very unlikely. I think there's some theories that they could craft something that would bar him from running for office again under basically the amendment that barred Confederates from running for office. But I don't know if that's really a well-developed legal theory or not.
Well, and we've seen what happened to Republicans in the House who voted for impeachment. Liz Cheney, for example. I mean, she's just been under fire ever since then from Trump Republicans saying that she's not fit for office and likely to have a primary challenger. And Matt Gaetz from Florida is in Wyoming to rally support for the Trump Republicans. Senate Republicans may be looking at that and saying like, I'd really like to vote yes on conviction, but I don't want a primary opponent. I don't want Trump to target me.
Yeah, and I just think that, the censure is just the Senate's way of saying, now, you future presidents, this is not what you're supposed to do. But I don't, and that's a lot of, the concern about, and part of the reason why Nancy Pelosi said they were moving forward with impeachment was to sort of draw a bright line of what is unacceptable behavior for future presidents. And, a censure's maybe, the thought is that this is better than saying nothing. But, you're right. I think that I think Republicans got cold feet, and that, and I agree with the panel that I would see conviction as being really unlikely.
Yeah,
it is.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll say briefly that the idea that a president can't be impeached after he's out of office, if that is what the Constitution says, then that needs to be fixed, because that's just a free card to do whatever you want in your last 3 weeks in office for any president, and not be barred from running again. So that's kind of an unworkable rule if that is the case.
Well, and you hear a lot about the short American attention span, and it is pretty remarkable that 3 weeks ago this mob invaded the Capitol, and we've learned since that they weren't just there to to crash in and look at the statues and paintings. They wanted to kidnap lawmakers and perhaps even kill some of them. So so that happens, and now we're like, well, let's just move on from that. Let's censure the president, maybe tell him, hey, don't you lead an insurrection ever again. I mean, it seems really maddening that this happened, and we're just going to sort of let time slip away and pretend like, well, it's not a big deal. Let's unify now. I don't know. It just tells you where our politics is at, and I realize the Liz Cheneys of the world are having a hard time with the politics of this, but they did the right thing, and that should count for something. And but unfortunately the Matt Gaetzes of the world are who's speaking for the Republican Party at this point.
It's really rich coming from the party of personal responsibility to just sort of say like, well, let's move along. Let's, let's not hold somebody accountable for their actions. Nothing new here. Move along.
Well, and as these trials happen for the people that are being charged with crimes, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of pretty frightening evidence and testimony about what happened in the Capitol. And I mean, that could be months from now, if not years. And so, but yeah, I mean, it was a dark day, and I think we haven't really done enough there hasn't been a reckoning for it.
So shifting gears a little bit to what is going to be coming up here, it sounds like the confirmation hearing for Tom Vilsack's appointment as U.S. Ag Secretary maybe next week. What topics do you guys expect might come up in that hearing? Will there be anything controversial?
Probably the sort of accusations that he hasn't treated black farmers fairly, that the USDA under his administration, didn't treat them fairly. I expect that to come up, but it looks like he'll be confirmed quite easily.
Yeah, you would expect some members to use the hearings to make some points about things, but I think that he's expected to get pretty widespread support. It's one of the few that Republicans are going out of their way to even praise sometimes. So I'm definitely seen as kind of a consensus or unity choice on that one.
So James, you had a story last week about elected officials, including Governor Kim Reynolds and U.S. Representative Cindy Axne, being angry about how the National Guard members were treated when they were in D.C. To kind of provide security around the election. What did you find out about why the Guards men and women were like sleeping in parking garages and that kind of thing? And was there any fault, or was this just kind of a thing that happened?
It's not real clear. I mean, it's one of these things where it wasn't planned, that they were going to Washington necessarily. I mean, it was kind of short notice, I guess is what I'm saying. It does seem like the military, with its billions of dollars and facilities, would have had a place more suitable for these National Guard men and women than sleeping in a parking garage. It's sort of interesting. I did see a few social media posts from people who said, hey, if you want to complain about a parking garage, I can tell you about a rice paddy in South Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. That everything's relative. Your accommodations are relative. I don't know. I mean, nobody had a definitive answer. I couldn't get a definitive answer why they were treated this way, and why they were, whether they were really brought home early or not.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions from the audience here. I'm just going to try to see kind of on the national front. Some of them are state related. So one of our commenters is talking about Chuck Grassley, and if he, chooses not to run again, or if at some point he retires. They're wondering if Pat Grassley, his grandson, is kind of the ordained one, or if you think that he's going to run away with the primary, or it'll be a brawl between some other folks.
That's a thing people have said for a long time, is that Pat Grassley would eventually run for that seat. I mean, certainly Representative Pat Grassley is ambitious. He's the Speaker of the Iowa House, but I don't necessarily see him posturing to move to federal office, although perhaps there'd be an opportunity. If he did run, I don't know that he would necessarily be would be a field clearing candidate. I think you would expect other people to run for that, because it's a rare opportunity to have an open Senate race. And there's other people that have been waiting for a long time for an opportunity like that as well.
I mean, look at people who lined up to run against Terry Branstad, the most, arguably the most formidable Republican candidate. There's always going to be, I think, especially people trying to run from the right against somebody who would be perceived, I think, as an establishment figure if your name was Grassley. So I definitely would expect there to be a primary, and that no one would be anointed unless, of course, Chuck Grassley were to, quit midterm and let the governor appoint as an interim successor, which of course everybody said, oh, that'll never happen. Terry Branstad will never leave early. I think I was one of those people. Terry Branstad will never leave early and leave Kim Reynolds in charge, but it turns out that he did. So
I think you're right that there will be other people interested in that seat, and we're already hearing, some names, and some people seem to be posturing to run for the Senate if there's an opening, both Republicans and Democrats. However, I'm reminded of when Chet Culver ran for governor and talking to one of the party leaders, GOP party leaders, who said most of the people out there think they're voting for the name Culver. They think they're voting for John Culver. And, as far as Chet's concerned, it doesn't make any difference. And it's the same with Grassley, that people will vote for the Grassley name, whether it's Pat or Chuck.
Interesting. Both one-syllable names.
Yeah.
Conveniently. So a lot of questions from the audience too, just going back to the energy front, two kind of related questions, like, is there a way for rural Iowa to move into the green energy world and expand its footprint beyond ethanol and wind turbines?
I think, I guess I don't know what, I imagine the question asker has some specific technology in mind, but I think wind is going to be part of the future for the foreseeable future in Iowa. I think, to be more movement on local solar would take some coordination between different levels of government. And I think that there's hope that that can happen under the Biden administration. But I also think that that's happening to some extent. I don't think, the country's maybe behind on renewable energy, but rural Iowa, there's a lot of places where they're doing a good job of it. That's my understanding.
There has been some research too about how much more Iowa could benefit with some advances in energy storage. So, batteries, and that would benefit both the wind and solar energies if the state could develop some better storage capacity for some of this, excess energy that's being really being generated here. And so I see that as an opportunity. I don't see it as one that is actually being pursued at this point. You hear a lot of talk at the State House about broadband technology, but you're not hearing much about energy storage at this point.
And there are people
Kathy,
who,
go ahead, James.
I was going to say, there are people who still talk about switchgrass and algae, and there's a variety of energy sources out there, but at this point they're not widespread and not generating a lot of energy.
Can we generate energy with an indoor rainforest at all?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I've never heard of that.
Well, Kathy, I wanted to ask you a little bit.
Rapids joke.
No, Kathy, you remember the indoor rainforest, right? That was going to be built first in Iowa City, and then it had moved somewhere else, and yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yes, I do remember that.
I think Pella at one point, wasn't that the last stop?
Pella. I think that I was going to say Pella. I think might have been the last stop.
Were there bonobos involved in that at all?
Probably.
It was the bonobo people. I think there was some collaboration.
Well, that was the inspiration for the Chet Culver Patty Judge ad where they wore raincoats and made fun of Jim Nussle for voting to fund the indoor rainforest in Iowa, they said. So.
Well, Kathy, I wanted to ask you, the Capital Dispatch, I know, recently celebrated its 1-year anniversary in Iowa. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how this not-for-profit news outlet is different from the Iowa newspapers that you've worked for in your career and what your goals are for the Dispatch.
Yeah, well, it's very different from the newspapers in the sense of the fact that our news is all online. We are a nonprofit, so we don't accept advertising. There's no subscription fees. There's, it's all funded by donations through a national not-for-profit, which is called States Newsroom. And right now, I think there's 21 of us now, 21 outlets around the country, and all based on state news. Part of the mission is to try to cover state capitals that are being depopulated from, with journalists, especially because of newspapers. Staffs really a lot of attrition there because of budgets being cut, et cetera. Pandemic has only accelerated that. So the idea was to, try to plug in gaps in journalism, but also to provide free content to these community journalism outlets that may be struggling. So Iowa Capital Dispatch has newspapers that use our content for free all over the state. And they, we're hoping that frees them up then to focus on doing more great journalism in their communities. So yeah, giving away our content for free is one big difference. Our approach to news is not that much different from what I remember from the Register, in part because most of us are former Register. In fact, all of us at this point are former Register reporters. There are 4 of us. And so our approach to news isn't that much different. We do try to focus on stories that might be sort of left to the side, stories that nobody else would be reporting if we didn't focus on them. But we also, at the State House, we're writing, some of the same stories that everybody else is, sometimes from a different perspective, but it is straight news. I mean, in terms of not being, we're not writing opinion disguised as news. We're not trying to, put our thumb on the partisan scale one way or the other. So in that way, we're similar to the type of news product that you would see in a newspaper.
Well, that's great. I've seen a lot of stories in the recent months, just exclusives that you guys have dug up. So for journalists, thank you for doing that work. I wanted to ask you and James, and really any of the other panelists, the Iowa legislative session started, I believe, January 11th with no masks required in the State House. Those of you guys who are covering the State House on a daily basis, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how this has affected, how COVID's affected the Gazette and the Capitol Dispatch as you cover the legislative session.
Yeah, for us, we're doing it a lot more virtually now than we were, even more so than we were back in June when the legislature came back for its 3-week wrap-up session after they suspended the session because of COVID. There's a lot of more opportunities to cover and to participate in the legislature and their discussions online. It's not perfect by any means. It's a little bit better than it was the first week, but there's still their technology and their rules for participation still leave a lot to be desired. And there are a lot of people that I've heard from who say, I would like to go to the Capitol and talk to lawmakers directly about my issue, but I cannot go there because they're not wearing masks, they're not requiring masks. The social distancing, you can't count on that. And so people just don't feel safe there. And I think that's a big concern.
Yeah, like the Dispatch, we're not covering the Capitol at the Capitol. We're covering it remotely, which is not great. I've said that the only thing worse than being there covering the legislature is covering it remotely. The technology, is somewhat limiting, and it's, sometimes if people don't speak directly into a microphone, you don't know what they said. So, I mean, you can be listening to a meeting and have no idea if somebody made a good argument or not. I think it's going to be interesting how we go forward from here, because I think next year there are a lot of Iowans who are going to say, like, well, I hope you're allowing me to watch the legislature from home, the committee meetings, the subcommittee meetings. Everybody's had to adapt. I was talking to a lobbyist the other day, and he said because of the mask situation, that people aren't wearing masks, he's at the Capitol, but he's having Zoom meetings with people who also are at the Capitol, rather than go to their office or stand face to face with them. He's having Zoom meetings with people in the same building that he's in.
James, you mentioned it's maybe harder, whereas before you could, kind of pigeonhole someone and get a quote. It's a little harder to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're there, you run into people, you can make a point of running into them and asking them a question. I've had, so luck texting people or emailing them, but, it's pretty easy to ignore a text or an email, even a phone call. We've all had that experience as reporters that, oh, I didn't get your message. I must have missed that one. My phone was off. There's a whole list of reasons for not responding. And the other thing is, you don't get any sense, sort of is a debate tense? I mean, you can tell sometimes from what's being said, but you can't really get any sense of the atmosphere at a meeting or when the floor debate is going on. So I guess that's lost in the technology.
Yeah, I think there's also a concern if something happens, so something unexpected happens that's not on camera. Are there enough reporters in the building who are going to be able to tell Iowans what happened? That's kind of a recurring nightmare of mine, that something major will happen that's not on camera, and where are we going to go to get that story?
One other thing is that they're like subcommittee meetings, you can follow it remotely, but they aren't archiving any of that material. So you can't go back and look at it. And I think, as a reporter, I wish we could, but I think for other people, who may not be free at 10:35 in the morning to watch a subcommittee meeting, they might like to go back in the evening and see what was said and, the arguments for and against a specific bill. And that might be something that's addressed after the session, I hope.
There's a lot of benefit actually to doing these subcommittees. Subcommittees, by the way, are really the only opportunity that members of the public have to speak directly to lawmakers about a bill in a public setting. And so there's a lot of value. They're sort of like mini public hearings, or they can be. And doing those via Zoom, even after the pandemic, would help people from far corners of the state who otherwise might have to drive several hours, take time off work, deal with childcare, et cetera, to speak to their legislators. I think it has a potential to expand a lot of participation. Unfortunately, the way the House is doing it, you have to be there in person to speak at a subcommittee, or you can submit your comments in writing, which you never know if somebody's actually going to read those. And people who don't have access to the internet may be left out, of the discussion altogether.
So this week, 2 education bills have been top priority for the Republican-led Iowa House and Senate. Todd, I know you had a column touching on just these education bills. I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about the bill dealing with in-person learning.
Well, there's the governor has made it a priority to get kids back into the classroom. Despite the ongoing pandemic. She and others have argued that schools are not a huge generator of virus spread. So she believes that, in-person education is important. There are, lots of indications that, the distance learning has caused some problems for kids, even to the point that there's some mental health issues and things from being isolated. So, a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle probably share that view, but where there's a difference is that, Democrats and others, would like local school districts to be able to sort of look at local conditions and make those decisions on whether they offer 100% in person or a hybrid or based on what the community spread is or the test positivity rates. But the governor has basically, this fall mandated that they do at least 50% in person. Now she's urging the legislature to do 100% in person mandate. Parents can opt out and do virtual, but sort of the hybrid option is still possible, but 100% has to be offered. So that's got a lot of school districts, especially in urban areas, wondering how they're going to get all of those kids into classrooms, socially distance them. And so, yeah, I think the fighting, issue there is local control. Should this be a state edict, or should, local school districts be able to decide what's best for their situation?
I'd add that this bill is on the fast track, big time.
Yeah.
The Senate debated it and passed it tonight. The House is expected to take it up yet tonight and send it to the governor's desk. They want this, it'll take effect within 2 weeks of the day that it's signed, giving school districts a little bit of time, but not very much time to get their act together and figure out how they're going to manage this. So that is on a super fast track, even as things go in the legislature.
Well, and to put it in perspective, this is Thursday, and typically on a Thursday afternoon, committee meetings get canceled so people can head back home. I mean, people are checking out Thursday morning, basically. And here we are at, it's after 6 o'clock, and both chambers are debating because they want to get this legislation done this week so the governor can sign it this week. Apparently it's school choice week, and she wants to sign it this week, and put it into effect in 2 weeks. So this is her priority, and as she told the legislature, she wants this to be the first bill across her desk, and I guess they're taking her seriously.
So speaking of school choice, Senate File 159 would provide up to $5,200 to parents who want to send their kids to private or charter schools. This isn't the first year that school choice has come up, but how likely is this to pass this year, or some version of it?
It's going to happen. Again, this was one of the governor's priorities listed in the condition of the state. The pandemic has spurred public opinion and also galvanized Republican legislators for this because districts, parents suddenly were looking around. If their school wasn't offering in-person classes, they started looking around to say, well, can I open enroll to this district or that district to get my kid in school, and furthermore to get my kid back in sports. A lot of this has to do with extracurriculars and seniors who want scholarships. A lot of considerations besides just can Johnny still learn math over the computer, but they were finding barriers to open enrollment, and they were complaining to their lawmakers about it. Lawmakers have wanted to expand state support for private schools for a long time on the Republican side. This is their excuse to do that as well.
Like Kathy said, it's been a lot of pieces of this bill have been priorities for Republicans for a long time, nationally and in Iowa. And I think for a lot of families, the pandemic kind of made the case for more school choice to them. And so they're certainly buoyed by that. And obviously they made gains in the legislature, so they can kind of do whatever they want. But it has a lot of pieces to it. So there's the open enrollment, there's the education savings account, which critics call vouchers. And then there's it would expand charter schools as well. And you can imagine in like a more narrowly split legislature, they might have done one of those things, or some combination or something. And so it is kind of a lot. The vouchers, so-called vouchers, are kind of getting the most attention, but at least the financial notice that the LSA put out suggested that would be pretty slow to the uptake, that's going to be a pretty small portion of students in the next few years. The charters are the ones they said that they really can't make an estimate of, and because they're not that many private schools in Iowa, they're kind of situated in, they're not situated evenly across the state. I wonder if you'll see more charter schools than voucher utilization. But I think there's good pieces to it, but it certainly is a big bill, does a lot of different things, and people have a lot of concerns about it.
Adam, since you mentioned the LSA, one question I had is, do we have a sense of the financial hit that public districts would face based on this?
I haven't seen details on like how per pupil funding would be affected, but it's so the governor's pitching. I think she envisions it being $3 million in the first year and $50 million over several years, which for the education savings account specifically, that wouldn't count students who go to charter schools, which that's a pretty tiny portion of what we spend on education. But like I said, the LSA report kind of said that there's a lot of question marks, that they can't really anticipate what the full impacts would be.
Well, and I would anticipate if Republicans continue to keep the majority, especially the trifecta in years ahead, they'll probably expand this. I mean, to a greater scope than the 10,000 students, I guess, that it would affect now. I think the significant aspect of it is that this is the first time since I've been watching politics in Iowa over the past 25 years that a major education initiative came from the State House and didn't have anything to do with improving public schools. It's basically centered on trying to allow people to leave public schools. And I think that's a pretty big change from the traditional support that we've seen in both parties for public schools in the state. And I'm troubled by the direction we're going in. Charter schools are an interesting concept. I think they have an upside, but this bill sort of would allow any individual or group to apply to create a charter school. I'm not 100% sure who's going to make the decisions on who gets to open a charter school, but I think we're going to basically be, shifting a lot of public education funding to religious-based education, which, I think is in the wrong direction, but that's where we're headed.
Well, I think there's an argument too that are we spending the money to fund public schools, or are we spending the money to fund education? And if it's the latter, then parents and students should have some choice about where they go. That gets I don't think that gets talked about very much, because this always gets framed as we're taking money away from public schools, which at the same time that the governor's talking about a $3 million price tag on this bill, she's also talking about a 2.5% increase in state aid to public schools. So are public schools losing money, or are they is it the case of they're losing money that they might have gotten if it wasn't spent somewhere else? I'm not sure, like Adam was saying about the LSA, the Legislative Services Agency estimates, a lot of this is pretty hard to put a number on at this point and what the impact will be. But yeah, Todd, I think you're right that as long as Republicans are in control of the legislature, we'll probably see an expansion of this in the years ahead.
So a question from an audience member, Janet asks, does Senate File 159 make it possible for state-financed white flight from public schools? She's wondering if, what that's going to mean in terms of, she says, will this lead to state-sponsored school segregation?
Well, there's another bill that deals with open enrollment in, 5 districts, Kathy, Des Moines, Waterloo, West Liberty, and I'm not sure what the other districts are, where basically you're prevented from open enrolling out of those districts because they're trying to achieve some semblance of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Diversity.
Diversity, yes. Yeah.
To
prevent
voluntary diversity plans. And actually that is in, they tried that as a separate bill last year, and the Senate, I think, maybe passed it. It didn't go all the way through, but now they're eliminating those diversity plans in the Senate File 159 as a reason to bar open enrollment. So, that I think is where the arguments are centered on, sponsoring segregation, and that the argument will be that poor parents and minority parents will actually have fewer choices than white, more affluent parents, because for private schools, first of all, they charge tuition that the state scholarship probably won't totally cover. Private schools have maybe tougher admission requirements that a student who's been stuck in a quote failing school might not be able to overcome. And these religious schools, fairly routinely, will discriminate in using the opponent's word against LGBTQ, and they may not be set up to take kids with disabilities, special education, a lot of those things that that they can choose their students a lot more, than the parents are making the choice. The schools are making that choice, and so that is where the discrimination arguments are centered on that bill, I think.
And I think what's also lost sometimes in this discussion is that the need for a robust public education system, whether you have charter schools or private schools, religious-based schools, whatever, there still is a need for a very strong public school system for some of those reasons that Kathy just mentioned, that a lot of private schools aren't set up to serve students with developmental disabilities. If you look around the state, there are a lot of communities where there are no choices. There is nothing but the public school system, and that just really magnifies the need for a strong system. And what we've seen is, minimal increases in funding for public education over the years, sort of just hardly keeping pace with inflation. So those schools have not been able to, increase their offerings and been able to increase the quality of their offerings. And that, I guess that support for public education is somewhat lacking. I don't know if we've just taken it for granted, or it's, a case of people not supporting it, but we're losing that.
I would just add that there's.
Go ahead, Adam.
I just add quickly that there's a lot of school choice looks like a lot of different things, and even within public schools, we can have school choice by having more kind of regional collaborations and things like the what Kirkwood does, what Iowa Big does. There's different models, magnet schools, which Cedar Rapids has, but you have to apply for a lottery. But so if you're against the private money or public money for private schools thing, there's still a lot we can do to give families more opportunities within the education system.
So shifting away, just because there's a lot of other topics I want to hit on here. Another big change being proposed by Republicans is a referendum on a constitutional amendment saying there's no right to an abortion in Iowa. I'm not a constitutional law scholar. I'm kind of wondering how this would fit with what's happening on the federal level.
Well, I mean, the argument made by proponents of this amendment is that it wouldn't make abortion illegal. It would just say there's no right to an abortion in the state constitution, which would also mean that there's no right to taxpayer-funded abortion in Iowa. But abortion would still be legal. The argument against this is that it's just a step towards making it illegal in Iowa. And we've seen in some states, this seems to be a route pursued in other states, as well as some states where they're codifying a right to abortion. So regardless of what happens to Roe v. Wade, it will be legal in New York, for example.
Yeah, basically, if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, then Iowa can ban abortion, and there's no legal right to it here, so that would make it easier. And I think they're also trying to basically win the legal argument over various restrictions that they'd like to put in place before this gets to the courts. I mean, they had the heartbeat bill and waiting periods and things that were, the waiting period in particular was found unconstitutional, and because the court found that women had a fundamental right to reproductive health decisions, and so they're trying to sort of win in the courtroom through the Constitution before a law even gets there.
There's a lot of pushback from Republicans against what they call unelected judges. And, you know, they think that judges are making state law in terms of, you know, the 72-hour waiting period that Todd just mentioned was struck down in 2018. And in that ruling, the state Supreme Court said that there was a constitutional right to abortion. Republicans beg to differ. They want to make it clear that there is none, and they really kind of want people to not focus on what the implications will be for policy. They say, well, this bill doesn't ban abortion. Well, no, it doesn't, but it sets the scene to make it easier to win a court case over bills that restrict and ban abortion. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit of semantics there. They make the same argument over the gun amendment, which is also being debated tonight in the House. And that argument, they say, well, it doesn't expand, you know, gun rights at all, other than putting the Second Amendment, which is already a federal in the federal Constitution, in the Iowa Constitution. But again, you know, they're imposing a stricter standard for review of existing and new gun restrictions, and making it harder to win those court battles if you're trying to restrict gun rights. So again, it's not, they say it's about tying judges' hands, or, you know, to bring control back from the courts to the legislature, but it's also really a lot about trying to, as Todd just said, sort of stacking the deck before you get in the court.
I see. So I know that one thing we've touched on briefly, just with the conversation about masks, and others just about COVID, obviously the big situation we're dealing with. I wondered, so President Biden has said he wants 100 million COVID-19 vaccines administered in the first 100 days of his presidency. Iowa recently announced people over 65 can start getting those vaccines. Sounds like it's pretty hard to get an appointment. Is this increase in vaccinations anywhere near possible? And how's the rollout going in Iowa?
My understanding is that the 100 million in 100 days is actually not very aggressive. It's kind of what we were ramping up to anyway. People are actually kind of challenging him to increase that goal by quite a bit. But so far, you know, on the 8th day of the Biden administration, I guess there are signs that next week states are going to get a few more vaccines, but there's just really, it seems like there's really little ability for state or local officials to plan anything. That there's, you know, they hope that they know what they get for the following week, but they don't know like kind of when it's really going to ramp up. And so the challenges here are definitely at all levels of government. And I don't think it was helpful for the Biden folks to come out and say that there was no vaccine plan, and then for Fauci to have to say, well, actually there was a vaccine plan. I think that kind of just mucks it up with politics. But it certainly appears that the Biden administration is more competent and will take this more seriously. But that takes a few weeks to trickle down. That's not something it's not a faucet you can just turn on.
Well, and the supply is the issue too. I mean, I heard the governor today talking about Iowa will get 6,300 more doses. 6,300. I mean, we need 63,000 or 630,000. I mean, 63,000 is nothing in what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, and I think people are confused about how to figure out, you know, how to get in line. How do they, you know, where do they go? The governor announced a map yesterday that is interactive where you can see, but you know, your 75, 80-year-old grandparents might not be so enthusiastic about an interactive online map. So I think you're seeing pharmacies and other places get a lot of calls. They don't have any answers for folks that are calling. There's just a lot of anxiety and confusion. And I think that's where the state maybe needs to step in and create some sort of system where people can, get in the queue and feel like, okay, at some point in the near future, I'm going to get a phone call and I'm going to get an appointment and I'm going to get a vaccine. And so far, we haven't really seen a system like that. It's call your doctor, call your pharmacy, call Hy-Vee. I mean, it's been kind of difficult.
The doctor's
public
office is
health.
saying, yeah, the doctor's offices are saying, don't call us. We'll let you know when
Right.
it's available.
I had heard from my parents, it was like they heard if they got up at midnight and called, they would have better luck. So they tried it at 12:01 and they still couldn't get in. So then my mom went to bed for a few hours and got up at 5 a.m. and tried it. I mean, it just sounds like really, really challenging.
And interestingly, we're starting to hear that vaccines that were allocated for things like the state veterans home, for example, state-run care centers, Department of Corrections, that half those staffs don't even want the vaccine. And so, there's thousands of vaccine doses that have been reserved for these agencies or departments or care centers, which haven't been used because you've got staff people who maybe need a little bit more persuasion and education about what these vaccines are like and what you can expect. But right now they're saying no thanks. And so how are those vaccines getting back in to presumably they're not being wasted, but we're not really clear on where they're going.
Well, I want to ask too, before we run out of time here, a topic that's come up at past Pints in Politics, and I wanted to get an update. Adam, since you live in the 2nd Congressional District, could you tell us what's happening with Rita Hart's challenge of Marionette Miller Meeks's narrow win?
Yeah, so as everyone remembers, that was what ended up being a 6-point margin, and the Republican Marionette Miller Meeks was seated in Congress. And at this point, the Hart campaign has filed a notice to contest, and the Miller Meeks campaign has filed a motion to dismiss. Basically, the Hart campaign came up with 22 votes that, if they were all counted, that would net her the victory. The Miller Meeks campaign has a few criticisms. One, they say that Hart should have exhausted her legal remedies in Iowa. And 2, they say that the 22 ballots that are that haven't been counted, that they say there might be actually other votes that weren't counted for similar reasons. And so even what they're offering isn't a full accounting for it. So to my understanding, and maybe somebody else has more up-to-date information, it's kind of in the U.S. House Administration Committee's court now. And membership of that is they're still working out membership in the new U.S. House. And so I don't know that there's a specific timeline. I think the Iowa campaigns have both candidates have kind of met their obligations, and now there'll be additional proceedings in the House.
Well, that's good to know. So we're just in a waiting game. Just to kind of finish us off, I know, Adam, you tipped us off this week on Twitter to a rebate that Busch Light consumers can get based on the number of inches of snowfall in the state. So we're up to $6 now. I think we've gotten more snow than that. But anyway, and I think we're supposed to get some more snow this weekend. But I wanted to ask the panelists, if you could get a snowfall rebate on some other pandemic coping tool, what would it be?
Can I get a rebate on like the salaries we're paying the legislature and our other government officials? Just, can I put my part of the taxes back on that?
Good luck.
The more it snows, the less they get paid.
Maybe a rebate from all of the carrots and lettuce I'm eating right now to try to lose the pandemic pounds, because the coping, I think the path was straight to the refrigerator. So I'm working on that now.
I'm with you there. Lots of knockoff Oreos in our house.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I just didn't want a straight up rebate on like booze, whatever. I mean, that's the pandemic drink. It's just everything together in a big shaker and just see what happens.
I think it's the ultimate coping tool.
It's, it works for me. That's all I can say.
Well, no matter what happens in politics, I guess there's always ice cream and wine and that kind of thing. But I did want to offer our heartfelt thanks so much to our guest panelist, Kathy Obradovich, who is editor-in-chief of the Iowa Capitol Dispatch.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
And thank you to our other panelists, Todd Dorman, Adam Sullivan, and James Lynch from the Gazette.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks.
Our next Pints and Politics, our next virtual Pints and Politics is February